Nippon Paint Medifresh, a powerful combination of zinc, iron and silver.
Now we have to take a holistic view. And that's what this committee is going to do. We will take responsibility. You tell us what has to be done. The country has paid a heavy price for misguided policies. I will not have it when we can have a big export earner. So let that be very, very clear as to the policies. We are committed to green energy and we are going ahead.
In a landmark address at the Sri Lanka Green Hydrogen Symposium 2023, President Ranil Wickremesinghe yesterday outlined a comprehensive vision for Sri Lanka's role in addressing climate change, emphasizing sustainable practices and embracing cutting-edge green energy technologies. President drew attention to the alarming findings of the UNF emission report for 2023. Expressing concern over the potential 3 degrees Celsius global temperature increase by the end of the century, he underscored the need for immediate global action, lamenting the unfulfilled emission reduction promises of developed nations. In the meantime, the Sri Lanka National Hydrogen Roadmap was presented by the Power and Energy Minister Kanchana Wijayasekara to President Ranil Wickremesinghe.
Your Excellencies, distinguished guests and friends, it gives me great pleasure to be here with you to discuss green hydrogen. I must thank all those who are helping us. To begin with, Greenstat, then there's all the names out here, USAID, Government of Denmark, Green Strategic Partnership. I won't go through all of them, but say collectively, I'd like to thank all of them. I was reading the UNF Emission Goals Report 2023, which talks of broken promises. It says by end of this century, we will be about 3 centigrades higher. Just imagine what that is going to be. And the cuts which were promised by the developed nations has not taken place. But even with that, we come to 2.5 degrees centigrade. So then we have to come down to 1.5. That's what our target is for 2030. And this means there has to be significant cuts by everyone. The contribution of the rich is about 4 times that of the poor. About half the emissions would be traced back to those who have an income of $40,000 a year. Others are behind us. So that's how bad the situation is. What will Sri Lanka do in this? Firstly, we will go to COP28 to insist on 1.5 degrees centigrade. That has to be hit. And we will work with everyone who's supporting it. That's Sri Lanka's position. There won't be a change in that. Secondly, Sri Lanka must also prove that we are also willing to make a contribution. Actually, our levels of pollution are very small. But that doesn't mean that we should not make a contribution. Bigger the contribution, the better. So that's what I am looking at. And the role of the energy. According to the UN Secretary General, there has to be a tripling of the renewable energy capacity by 2030. That's where we are. What is the share that we can take out of it? Firstly, looking at it broadly as the international objective, the one of reaching 1.5 degrees centigrade target. The other is how do we benefit from it. Both those are interesting. So we have at the moment the potential of becoming an energy exporter. And that's what we have to think of. How are we going to maintain this goal? How are we going to achieve this goal? It also means energy independence for Sri Lanka. Now you export energy. Look, 2/3 of our country dry zone. Only 1/3 is wet. Even the wet zone is suitable, but let's keep that aside. From the whole dry zone, why don't we become an exporter of energy? Solar and wind, both are there. So long ago, 2000 years ago, when we were dry zone, we exploited it for irrigation and became an exporter of grain. Now we can become an exporter of energy. Let's go for it. That is my idea. Sri Lanka needs a new economy. And this has to be one of it. Green energy, solar power, wind power. We are just scratching the surface. I think the World Bank draft gave us about 50 gigawatts. Even 50 gigawatts is big looking at the requirements of many other countries. You have the surplus to export. Let's build on it. That is my view. And that's what I'm going at. Now you talk of $10 billion worth of investments. For a bankrupt country, just imagine having $10 billion worth of investment by 2030. That makes a big difference to our economy. It makes it more attractive. Why do I ask for green hydrogen? Because we have a future with green hydrogen. To begin with at home, we will have our ports. We'll be able to supply green hydrogen. We become a regional location. Just look at that. And if you need it for aircrafts, okay, logistics and energy linked together. So many other areas, manufacturing. So this is why I've decided that we go in for few of the newer technologies. Green energy is one. We are looking at AI. AI is only a start. You can always catch up in 5 to 6 years' time. That's second, the knowledge economy. But we have to make a start. Look at our digitalization, we are backwards. But we are trying to go piggyback on India and to go ahead. So these are areas in which we can benefit and we should seek to benefit. Look at the ideas that are there. We talk of green hydrogen. Now look at of Belgium and Netherlands, there's an island being built, Elias, which will be about 15 acres. It will have its own generator plus it will be full of all the wind power instruments. Denmark is more ambitious. They are now planning to have an island 80 kilometers off the coast. Just imagine what we can do 80 kilometers off the coast of Jaffna. Long as we avoid birds that are migrating, potential is immense. Look at the uninhabited islands we have, the north. It may be an acre, 2 or 3, but remember that will be the core. On that you can build a platform, all concrete pillars, so the water is not affected. Okay, platform can be 5 acres, 10 acres. That's all that you have to do. So look at the immense capability we have. We should not let go of it. Maximum value addition. Look at the solar power. Look at the old reservoirs. Look at the canals. We must have all this. So this is why Sri Lanka will have an energy transition law and a new immediately I'll be setting up a new committee which will have multi-agency committee. The cabinet paper will most probably be submitted to cabinet next week. But we have to take a holistic view on it. How are we going ahead? Because you are faced with this issue that the price of energy from these new units at the moment will be higher than that of fossil fuels. So we have to not merely look at the price but also its impact in the long term. Does it benefit us or not? If that is so. Secondly, also the cost of capital. Are we to wait until the debt sustainability is achieved, which should be by end of the year, and then the markets start stabilizing, which will be sometime mid-year and we get a benefit of it? Or do we start now, which will be higher? We have to remember all this. At the moment, money is expensive for Sri Lanka. So we have to take some of those decisions, which is why I want this committee to review all the decisions, taking the economy into account. We can't have the least cost options, which has been touted by the CEB for a long time, which I have always been against. So the long-term power generation plan will have to be modified radically or redrawn. I would like a new plan looking into this. My experiences with the CEB has been bitter. When I was Prime Minister in the 90s and just before that under Mr. Premadasa, we asked for mini hydro. It was resisted. Fortunately, a subsequent administrations were able to force mini hydro and today we have all the mini hydro. Then we took power in 2002 and I cancelled Noricholi. It was not economical. And it was being funded by the Japanese with a more modern version. So they all went out and campaigned against me and I lost because we took it out. So we have Noricholi now. Have we benefited or have we lost? We are wondering what to do with it. You won't have had all those demonstrations. Part of it is due to how we have mismanaged our energy. We asked for wind and sustainable energy was downgraded. So now we have to take the whole, I hope there are members of the CEB also here. Now we have to take a holistic view. And that's what this committee is going to do. We will take responsibility. You tell us what has to be done. The country has paid a heavy price for misguided policies. I will not have it when we can have a big export earner. So let that be very, very clear as to the policies. We are committed to green energy and we are going ahead. And we'd like you to advise us as to how it is to be done. Thank you.
Thank you. Your Excellencies, my colleagues from the Diplomatic Corps, the Ambassador of the United States, and the High Commissioner of the United Kingdom, Mr. Pedersen, the Chairman of Clean Start India, Mr. Ovatigama, the Chairman of the Petroleum Development Authority of Sri Lanka, the senior officials from the Government of Sri Lanka, distinguished delegates, a very good morning to all of you. I frankly do not have much to add, and in fact, I would anticipate very stimulating discussions in this symposium today. So I would limit myself to making brief remarks, but before I go there, first of all, let me say a big thank you for bringing this symposium to Sri Lanka. And this is an effort which I am privileged to have been associated with in some sense for some time in terms of discussions, and I'm so delighted that this is actually happening today. So thank you very much. Thank you also for this opportunity to me to be here today amidst all of you. and to listen to the vision of the Honorable President about transforming the energy landscape of Sri Lanka, not just to respond to the challenge of climate, but also as a big export earner for Sri Lanka. And I will go in that direction in a minute. But before I go there, let me also mention that the presentation by the chairman of PDASL actually made me think about the key elements of the roadmap and the pillars of this strategy as well as the approach. And I think that this is exactly something which we have tried to undertake in India as well. So ladies and gentlemen, I would like to mention to you a bit from the India perspective. As you all know, India and Sri Lanka are old civilizations. But today, as I stand here, we also share a contemporary vision for a shared future of prosperity, of progress, and peace, where the people of the two countries march hand in hand together to develop, to use, and to achieve their full potential. In July this year, when the Honorable President of Sri Lanka visited India, Prime Minister Modi and President Wickremesinghe released a vision for promoting connectivity for prosperity. And that vision to promote connectivity for prosperity marks the cornerstone of our efforts, our joint efforts, to achieve the shared objective of promoting connectivity for prosperity. And it is in that perspective that I would like to mention that here we are talking not just of physical connectivity, of more ferries or flights between more points in India and Sri Lanka, of more interaction and more tourists coming from India, or even more financial and digital connectivity and educational connectivity. But we are talking as one of the most important elements of this connectivity as connectivity in the sphere of power and energy. It's just not about energy security of Sri Lanka. It's also about the potential that Sri Lanka has, which we are aware, the potential that Sri Lanka has to export its energy surplus. This is an element that we have been discussing this with our colleagues here in Sri Lanka as well as other possible stakeholders. Sri Lanka currently relied on three main revenue earners for foreign exchange: exports, tourism, and overseas remittances. And we all have seen what disruptions like COVID and other things that can happen in a completely unanticipated manner, what these disruptions can do to these sources of foreign exchange. Right next door, few nautical miles from some of the most potent and possible locations, just a few nautical miles to the west is India. Ladies and gentlemen, you will be bringing to the discussions here the developments that have taken place in India. I don't wish to take your time on that. But just to mention that India is an economy which is growing very fast. It is among the largest, fastest growing large economies of the world. It's already crossed $3 trillion, inching towards $4 trillion. But the important point here is that it took us 60 years from 1947 to 2007 to reach the first trillion mark. But for the next 40 years, that is from 2007 to 2047, when we turn 100, and a few months after that, Sri Lanka will turn 100, during those 40 years, we hope to add another $29 trillion to the economy. So if you divide 29 by 40, which roughly means, on an average, $1.5 trillion per year. $1.5 trillion per year. It does not only require energy, it requires clean and green energy. And that's where the potential of energy exports from Sri Lanka lies. So I would be very interested in seeing this roadmap not only develop, but also expand. We have been discussing with Sri Lanka various ways of interconnectivity of energy transmission. Mind you, if and when Sri Lanka, and it's not an if, it's a question of when, Sri Lanka connects to India for a bidirectional flow of power. Of course, Sri Lanka has this huge potential, so ultimately it will be exports from Sri Lanka, like now it is happening from India's other neighbors, such as Nepal and Bhutan, and of course Bangladesh shall join that very shortly. And it's already connected to the Indian grid. So Sri Lanka doesn't get connected only to the Indian grid, but to the BBIN grid. And therefore, the trade of power as a commodity which is happening in India can also then become a more regional reality. Green hydrogen affords us another way to connect the energy trade. There will be various models. There is so much of potential that not, in my view, and it's not a very informed view, but I think experts can dwell on it more, not one mode will suffice, and certainly not in the foreseeable future. So as we try to develop all these modes to connect India and Sri Lanka in terms of energy and power, I would urge that we focus on the benefits this type of connectivity in the realm of power and energy can bring, the benefits that it can bring to the people of both the countries. In fact, when I was listening to Mr. Surato Vitigama mention the various elements, I thought that perhaps, and forgive me for saying so, perhaps at some point in time, maybe a few years down the line, we might need to accelerate some elements of the roadmap, because the world will move rapidly in the direction of energy resources that are more climate friendly, and also the technology advancement is something which perhaps can help us by taking place in leap and bounds. So thank you very much to the organizers, to the hosts for giving me this opportunity. I would leave you with just these 4 keywords in terms of connecting India and Sri Lanka in the pursuit of a bright and prosperous future through connectivity in the field of energy. And these 4 words are commit, connect, partner, and prosper.
Senior officials, diplomatic colleagues, distinguished guests, it's a great pleasure to have the chance to speak briefly at this symposium. And the reason it's a great pleasure is because I think, summarizing what we've heard from the President and from my colleagues from the US and India, this is the most exciting thing that I have had the opportunity to talk about since I arrived in Sri Lanka in August. This is because, in my view, Sri Lanka has the ability, at least per capita, to become a regional superpower in green energy. And that's why this agenda is so exciting. And the President spoke eloquently about the vital importance of us implementing the commitments that we've made in terms of reducing and tackling global warming. The last decade, as everybody knows, was the hottest on record. The projections are not good. That is why the UK has committed £274 million to the Climate Action for Resilient Asia programme. That's part of a wider $11 billion commitment to international climate finance. And that's because we recognise the vital importance of tackling this issue. And I've heard from many experts in Sri Lanka about the direct effects climate change is having on this country. The UK is also committed to developing its hydrogen economy and seizing the opportunities it will bring for the UK, both for employment and for a thriving export industry for us, including through research and innovation in which the UK academics are major players. Our Department for Energy Security and Net Zero are leading on developing the UK's policy on international hydrogen trade and supply chains. The UK wants to play a key role in exporting hydrogen in our region and related goods and services to other countries. And as we heard from the Indian High Commissioner, however, not all countries are as lucky as the UK in terms of having access to green energy resources, in our case, offshore wind. We have the second largest area of offshore wind farms in the world after China. A lot of countries will have to meet their commitments on climate by importing things like green hydrogen. And that's where this great export opportunity for Sri Lanka arises. The connectivity to India is fantastic. The green hydrogen gives Sri Lanka a wider set of markets potentially in which to export. And that's why I think this conference today is so important. And I'm pleased that there is rising international support, including from the World Bank's Hydrogen for Development Partnership, to raise investment, innovation, and demand for hydrogen strategies in all continents around the world. One of the key things to consider, and this is something which the UK is thinking about as well, is the development of market regulatory frameworks to support the early expansion and evolution of the low-carbon hydrogen market. Realizing all of these opportunities will take the combined efforts of government, the private sector, and the research community. The hydrogen roadmap that Sri Lanka is developing, which we've seen this morning, will be a key tool to help us understand how we can support that journey. In summary, the UK is ready to play an active role in supporting Sri Lanka in realizing the enormous opportunities that your gifts of geography offer you and helping you to become that green energy superpower that I talked about at the beginning. Thank you very much.
Good morning, Minister of Power and Energy, Kanchana Wijesekara, Chairman Surat Ovitigama of the Petroleum Development Authority, Indian High Commissioner Gopal Bagley, UK High Commissioner Andrew Patrick, colleagues from Greenstat, Hydrogen, and the Sri Lankan and global energy sector. At a time when leaders around the world will soon gather at COP28 in Dubai to tackle the shared threat of climate change, this symposium on green hydrogen and renewable energy highlights how partnership and initiative can bring transformative change. And now it has the potential to do so in a way that is both sustainable and economically profitable. The world is already experiencing adverse impacts on vulnerable people, infrastructure, and nature from increasingly frequent and extreme weather events, from climate change like wildfires, droughts, and flooding. Here in Sri Lanka, we have experienced unprecedented flooding across many districts in recent weeks, bringing distress to communities. To limit warming to the 1.5 degrees Celsius and mitigate against those growing threats, the next decade will be vital. This is why we're calling it the decisive decade. It will require ambitious action from global leaders, governments, and businesses to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, to adapt to climate impact, and find innovative solutions to our energy needs. And that's why we're all here today. That's why so many parts of the United States government, including USAID, the Department of Commerce, Department of Interior, Department of State, we have all come together to support this conference and your efforts. We welcome Sri Lanka joining the Global Methane Pledge late last year, and we commend the President's focus on climate impact as a top priority, and Minister Wijesekara's efforts to actively implement reforms in the energy sector. These steps will put Sri Lanka on a stronger footing in the decades to come. The United States is taking our responsibility seriously in addressing the global climate crisis, both at home and abroad. Domestically, the Inflation Reduction Act was the largest climate investment ever, and a key stepping stone towards fulfilling President Biden's ambitious Paris Agreement target to cut U.S. emissions by 50 to 52% below 2005 levels by 2030. It has shown how big change can come when government policy and private sector ideas converge around a common goal. Overseas, through the President's Emergency Plan for Adaptation and Resilience, we're bolstering adaptation efforts to increase global resilience to the impacts of climate change. Globally, we have provided $1 billion to the Green Climate Fund and announced plans to provide $25 million to the Least Developed Countries Fund and $100 million to the Adaptation Fund. Here in Sri Lanka, USAID's energy program invests in renewable energy technologies in partnership with the government and local entrepreneurs. Through our grants, a Sri Lankan company is developing battery swapping stations for electric three-wheelers And we're working with our government counterparts at the Sri Lankan Standards Institute and the Public Utilities Commission to develop robust regulations on safety and standardization for electric vehicles and charging stations. USAID's Climate Change Adaptation Project is supporting innovative solutions to manage climate-related risks through market-driven private sector and community engagement. This work has been instrumental in conducting climate risk assessments of priority economic sectors here, including agriculture, fisheries, and tourism, and to propose adaptation pathways to complement the government's climate prosperity plan. Accelerating the global transition to a low-carbon future is a key part of our efforts. According to the International Energy Agency, clean energy investments in emerging economies must reach $1 trillion annually by 2030 for the world to hit a net zero by 2050. Governments need to develop policies and put in place incentives that help create the demand for investing in a clean energy future. And for that reason, the US government is currently providing technical support to the Petroleum Development Authority to enable offshore and deployment and green hydrogen production. The transition to a net zero energy system by 2050 represents the greatest economic opportunity since the Industrial Revolution to create millions of good-paying jobs. Over the next decade, scaling up that development of a global green energy economy will fuel the investment boom, reaching an estimated $4 trillion each year. This symposium today on green hydrogen shows that Sri Lanka has both the potential and ambition to be a vital component of the global solution to climate change and to be a part of the opportunities for economic growth. The US is here to partner with you, with Sri Lanka, as we adapt to the impacts of climate change and pioneer new technologies that will create a cleaner, safer, and more sustainable world for all. For example, in the United States, there have been technologies and innovations put in place by one American company called Constellation Energy. It's on its way to implement a record-setting 38% hydrogen blend at the Hillaby Generating Station, a 735 megawatt natural gas plant in Alabama. This project, alongside 25 other utility-led hydrogen pilot programs in the US, are actively exploring ways to produce the same amount of energy with less carbon footprint. Let's seek ways to bring this kind of technology to Sri Lanka. Now, financing will be an important component of these efforts, and we were happy to recently support $500 million of financing through the U.S. Development Finance Corporation to the Western Container Terminal. And the DFC is open to providing more financing, especially in renewables. Now, as Sri Lanka moves forward with its energy reforms, thanks to the efforts of the minister, I'm confident that the US government and US investors will be here to inject the financing and know-how to unlock the potential of Sri Lanka's private sector for energy security and economic growth. To conclude, I quote US Presidential Envoy for Climate, John Kerry, when he says, "The green energy transition is not a transition to be feared, it's a transformation to be seized. It is the world that we can have, the jobs, the investments, the opportunity, and the future. It's all about solving the climate crisis and not to prolong it." Thank you.
For more latest news, subscribe to FTTV.